Tonight, President Joe Biden will make a historic address from the Oval Office, breaking a decades-old tradition by choosing not to seek a second term. As the first sitting president since Lyndon B. Johnson in 1968 to bow out of a re-election campaign, Biden's speech comes after a dramatic weekend of a political upheaval. Having endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris as the new Democratic frontrunner, Biden's address will be his first since his announcement and promises to shed light on his decision, his future plans, and what this means for the Democratic Party. Join us as we delve into the significance of Biden's speech, the impact on the upcoming election, and the new dynamic shaping U.S. politics. Stay tuned as we bring you live coverage and expert analysis of this defining moment in the race for the White House. Hello there and welcome to our special coverage for tonight. And before we bring in our guest, here is the latest. Democratic delegates will soon confirm Vice President Kamala Harris as their presidential nominee in a historic move that could make her the first female president. This has generated cautious optimism as many believe Harris could be the candidate to take on and potentially defeat former President Donald Trump. Here's Nabil Khazini with more.
In 2 weeks from now, the Chicago's United Center will witness the nomination of Kamala Harris as a Democratic candidate for the U.S. presidential election. Harris secured enough delegates to win the nomination, but the delicate and dramatic role reversal between Joe Biden and his right arm is at the forefront of discussions in the United States. Some analysts see in her a new chance for the Democrats to beat Donald Trump and make history. If she wins the general election against former president, the now vice president will become the first woman president and the first black woman to hold the nation's top job.
Donald Trump was just found guilty of fraud on 34 counts. But let's also make no mistake, this campaign is not just about us versus Donald Trump. This campaign is about who we fight for.
Several new polls this week suggest a tight race between Harris and Trump, and that Harris may already be pulling stronger numbers than Joe Biden. The U.S. Vice President, now campaigning for the presidency, has always been careful not to contradict Joe Biden. However, last evening, she boycotted, along with some 70 Democrats, a speech of Netanyahu, despite vice presidents usually being the ones to preside over the Senate chamber. Questions have emerged over what she really thinks about the war on Gaza, with an evident pressure outside for an urgent ceasefire in Gaza. Harris will inherit a politically thorny issue. Her last absence from Netanyahu's speech has stoked hopes in her circles that she may adopt a tougher position towards the occupation authority. Others say her move was only vital in convincing pro-Palestinian voters.
All right, let's bring in our guest. Joining me live via Skype is Dr. Holly Schlanger, author, journalist, vice president of the Schiller Institute USA, and national spokesman for London LaRouche from Potsdam, Germany. Sir, thank you for agreeing to be with us.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Our pleasure. And from London, UK, is Mr. Kenneth Nicholas O'Keefe, activist and former U.S. Marine and Gulf War veteran. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation.
My pleasure.
Along with Adam Shapiro, political analyst and director of advocacy on Palestine at Dawn from Washington, D.C., USA. Thank you, sir, for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, let's delve into the discussion with our distinguished guest, and let me kick it off with you, Dr. Holly Schlanger. Given President Biden's decision to withdraw, how do you assess the impact of this move on U.S. global standing and its domestic political stability?
Well, I have to say I haven't seen any sign yet from the United States that there's a change in the works. We just had the NATO summit in Washington last week, which was a reaffirmation of a permanent war strategy against Russia, full support for Israel, and a threat against China. Now, there are some people saying that Harris has been somewhat less committed to the Israeli war. In fact, she's raised some questions about the Palestinians and the need for aid. But look, if you saw the Netanyahu speech, you saw the vast majority of members of both parties cheering wildly as he said that he's going to finish the job. Now, that said, there are other factors involved here. The war in Ukraine is lost, and there could be a shift going on there. The Ukrainian foreign minister was just in China. And then the Chinese are playing a role in coordinating a unified Palestinian movement in Gaza and the West Bank. So there are a lot of factors here, but I haven't seen any indication yet that there's a change in policy in the United States with the shift from Biden to Harris. In fact, you could argue that the reason they made the shift was that Biden is no longer a competent spokesman for the war policy.
So can we understand, Mr. Kenneth Nicholas O'Keefe, that maybe this is a strategic withdrawal, or as others may raise this question, maybe a sign of deeper issues? What do you think?
Well, I see important factors that really kind of explain everything. At the end of the day, we Americans have not fought defensive wars. The military-industrial complex is very much in charge of policy. The genocide, and I must say to my family in Gaza, God bless you, the active genocide that is being committed because exclusively the United States taxpayer is funding it. All of the politicians who were backed by AIPAC in this most recent election won. Those that were not backed by AIPAC lost. The Israeli stranglehold on policy is so absolute, and I am very much in my own category when it comes to naming the Jewish state of Israel and its stranglehold. So for me, it's nothing more than a dog and pony show. Now, what we do know about Joseph Biden is that this man touched his own daughter inappropriately and took showers with her by her own admission inappropriately. What this also reveals is the demoralization of America, the absolute complete moral bankruptcy of the nation, which allows a president, a commander-in-chief, who touches kids inappropriately in public and in fact showered with his own daughter inappropriately. Kamala Harris is married to a Jewish man. His position on Israel is absolute. The policy of Ukraine is one of white genocide, and it's actually fighting against a man named Vladimir Putin, who is building more churches and mosques in the world than any other world leader. And of course, he is the new Hitler, according to the Jewish state of Israel. And now we see the alliances around the world, which are making American hegemony a non-existent factor. And that doesn't even get me started with the military that I served as a U.S. Marine. We are a shadow of our former selves. We have woke ourselves into oblivion. And whether it's Kamala Harris or whether it's Donald Trump, I can assure you the policies are going to be exactly the same.
Let's bring Mr. Adam Shapiro to the discussion here. Mr. Adam, what do you think was the decisive factor in President Biden's decision to withdraw his election bid?
I think it's pretty straightforward that following his debate debacle, I don't think we could call it a performance even, it became very clear to a lot of people that he was not capable of being articulate, of carrying out a political campaign for the presidency at this point, and that from that perspective alone, many, in the Democratic Party in the United States, and especially the donor class, were not confident in him, and therefore basically, in many ways pulled the plug on him. This is being portrayed as Biden, taking a so-called, an alleged brave or courageous step. But what we know is that donors, and in particular the mega donors that effectively control our political system here in the United States, stopped paying. They stopped contributing money and threatened to continue to withhold funds unless Biden was replaced. So it's pretty straightforward and clear as to why this has happened. I agree with the other colleagues that this won't really represent a shift in policy from a subsequent administration if Harris wins, and that the Democratic Party itself has been committed to the kinds of policies that we've seen under Biden, and the kind of war profiteering and other forms of control globally as well as domestically that really just make it really indistinguishable between the Republican Party for all intents and purposes.
Excellent. And Dr. Holly Schlanger, what is your opinion when it comes to what is happening and what is being said among American citizens reacting to Biden's withdrawal amidst this rising criticism of his administration? Has Biden's decision really helped him politically, maybe, but complicated the Democrats' situation here?
Well, I find it somewhat interesting that as soon as he withdrew, the people who had been dumping on him came out and praised him as such a great leader. Look, I think the deeper problem here is that the American people are not getting the truth. As the other guests have referred to, there is a military-industrial complex, which includes the media, which includes the academicians and the think tanks, which is shaping a narrative, which is that the United States must maintain a rules-based order. Now, a rules-based order is a non sequitur. The rules change all the time. They are not based on international law. And so, to the extent the American people are watching this, what they're seeing is the United States engaging in wars. We're told these are necessary, that Putin is evil, that Putin's about to overrun Europe, that Hamas represents barbarism, that Israel stands for everything that's good. And, there's a lot of skepticism with people because the American people don't know too much about what's really going on. But you could see it in terms of the young people on the campuses this last spring protesting against the Israeli genocide against Palestinians. There is a potential for an awareness that goes outside of the control of the two parties by the donor class. But it's taking a long time to really take hold. I don't think we're going to see much effect in this election, although there are other shakeups that could occur. For example, the collapse of the Ukrainian army, especially here in Europe. What people are saying here is that Europe has completely sold itself to the American and the British policy in Ukraine and Israel. And the leaders are being discredited, the parties are collapsing. So there is a potential for some real shocks, but I don't see it coming from the political class.
Excellent indeed. And back to you, Mr. Kenneth Nicholas O'Keefe. We see here lots of criticism when it comes to Biden's administration. Is there any accomplishment over the past 3.5 years, particularly something in the economy, healthcare, and climate legislation?
Well, I'd say the transgender agenda has benefited profoundly. So, if you want to share your bathrooms with your young daughter with men who identify as women, I think you have a lot to be proud of. If you want to have the Federal Reserve money that John F. Kennedy issued in 1963, if you want to have that, unfortunately that didn't work well. But if you're the Federal Reserve Bank, I think, you should be quite happy with Joseph Biden. The military-industrial complex and those well invested in the arms manufacturing, I'm sure they did quite well. So, yeah, there's definitely some winners in this game, but it seems like it's the same old characters. Meanwhile, the suicide rates are up, depression rates, sudden death from COVID. That's a whole subject, isn't it? Wow, we shut down the entire economy under Biden's watch and literally compelled and under duress tons of people to get a vaccine for a flu, effectively, and even groups of young people who had a virtually zero chance of dying from this COVID thing were forced to take jabs or intimidated to getting jabs. But, you know, another winner would be the children that identify as the opposite sex. In California, they can get they can chemically castrate without their parents' consent. And, you know, so the children who, you know, are changing their minds are very open-minded to thinking that, you know, the one body part should be the other. They're winners, too. What we have is a society that is so dumbed down that the American people know nothing about the U.S. Constitution that I put my hand up under oath to protect and defend. You know, an oath that every other Marine and every other military person, and indeed all the politicians themselves. I have court transcripts from me 30 years ago calling out judges in the courts and asking them, what form of law are you practicing in here? Knowing full well that the answer to that question was not constitutional law, it's magistrate law. And what poses as law is actually the color of law. The Constitution is all but dead. And what we have is impunity.
Yes. Mr. Kenneth Nicholas O'Keefe, sorry, we have to interrupt you there just to go live as the president delivers his speech.
Thomas Jefferson wrote the immortal words that guide this nation. George Washington, who showed us presidents are not kings. Abraham Lincoln, who implored us to reject malice. Franklin Roosevelt, who inspired us to reject fear. I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think it's more important than any title. I draw strength and I find joy in working for the American people. But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people. We can never forget that, and I never have. I've made it clear that I believe America is at an inflection point. One of those rare moments in history when the decisions we make now will determine our fate of our nation and the world for decades to come. America's going to have to choose between moving forward or backward, between hope and hate, between unity and division. We have to decide, do we still believe in honesty, decency, respect, freedom, justice, and democracy? In this moment, we can see those we disagree with not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. Can we do that? Does character in public life still matter? I believe I know the answer to these questions because I know you, the American people, and I know this. We are a great nation because we are good people. When you elected me to this office, I promised to always level with you, to tell you the truth. And the truth, the sacred cause of this country is larger than any one of us. And those of us who cherish that cause, cherish it so much, a cause of American democracy itself, must unite to protect it. You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for for long years of experience in public life. But there's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now. Over the next 6 months, I'll be focused on doing my job as president. That means I'll continue to lower costs for hardworking families, grow our economy. I'll keep defending our personal freedoms and our civil rights, from the right to vote to the right to choose. I'll keep calling out hate and extremism. Make it clear there is no place in America for political violence or any violence ever, period. I'm going to keep speaking out to protect our kids from gun violence, our planet from climate crisis that is the existential threat. And I will keep fighting for my cancer moonshot so we can end cancer as we know it, because we can do it. And I'm going to call for Supreme Court reform because this is critical to our democracy, Supreme Court reform. You know, I will keep working to ensure America remains strong and secure and the leader of the free world. I'm the first president in this century to report to the American people that the United States is not at war anywhere in the world. We'll keep rallying a coalition of proud nations to stop Putin from taking over Ukraine and doing more damage. We'll keep NATO stronger, and I'll make it more powerful and more united than any time in all of our history. I'll keep doing the same for our allies in the Pacific. You know, when I came to office, the conventional wisdom was that China would inevitably surpass the United States. That's not the case anymore. And I'm going to keep working to end the war in Gaza, bring home all the hostages, and bring peace and security to the Middle East and end this war. We're also working around the clock to bring home Americans being unjustly detained all around the world. You know, we've come so far since my inauguration. On that day, I told you, as I stood in that winter, we stood in a winter of peril and a winter of possibilities. Peril and possibilities. We were in the grip of the worst pandemic in a century. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. But we came together as Americans, and we got through it. We emerged stronger, more prosperous, and more secure. Today we have the strongest economy in the world, creating nearly 16 million new jobs, a record. Wages are up. Inflation continues to come down. The racial wealth gap is the lowest it's been in 20 years. We're literally rebuilding our entire nation, urban, suburban, rural, and tribal communities. Manufacturing has come back to America. We're leading the world again in chips and science and innovation. We finally beat Big Pharma after all these years to lower the cost of prescription drugs for seniors. And I'm going to keep fighting to make sure we lower the cost for everyone, not just seniors. More people have health care today in America than ever before. And I signed one of the most significant laws helping millions of veterans and their families who are exposed to toxic materials. You know, the most significant climate law ever in the history of the world. The first major gun safety law in 30 years. And today, the violent crime rate is at a 50-year low. We're also securing our border. Border crossings are lower today than when the previous administration left office. I've kept my commitment to appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. I also kept my commitment to have an administration that looks like America and be a president for all Americans. That's what I've done. I ran for president 4 years ago because I believed and still do that the soul of America was at stake. The very nature of who we are was at stake. And that's still the case. America's an idea. An idea stronger than any army, bigger than any ocean, more powerful than any dictator or tyrant. It's the most powerful idea in the history of the world. That idea is that we hold these truths to be self-evident. We're all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We've never fully lived up to it. We'll walk away from it now. In just a few months, the American people will choose the course of America's future. I made my choice. I've made my views known. I would like to thank our great Vice President Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and a leader for our country. Now the choice is up to you, the American people. When you make that choice, remember the words of Benjamin Franklin hanging on my wall here in the Oval Office, alongside the busts of Dr. King and Rosa Parks and Cesar Chavez. When Ben Franklin was asked, as he emerged from the convention going on, whether the founders have given America a monarchy or republic, Franklin's response was, a republic, if you can keep it. A republic, if you can keep it. Whether we keep our republic is now in your hands. My fellow Americans, it's been the privilege of my life to serve this nation for over 50 years. Nowhere else on earth could a kid with a stutter, from modest beginnings in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claymont, Delaware, one day sit behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office as President of the United States. But here I am. That's what's so special about America. We're a nation of promise and possibilities, of dreamers and doers, of ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. I've given my heart and my soul to our nation, like so many others. I've been blessed a million times in return with the love and support of the American people. I hope you have some idea how grateful I am to all of you. The great thing about America is here, kings and dictators do not rule, the people do. History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands. We just have to keep faith, keep the faith, and remember who we are. We're the United States of America, and there's simply nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. So let's act together, preserve our democracy. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
And that was President Joe Biden live from the Oval Office in the White House, Washington, D.C. Of course, he says America in this address will have to choose between hate and hope. What is your comment, Dr. Halish Langer?
Well, it's hard to start, know where to start. I mean, I think his main pitch was that we're defending democracy. And if you look at the U.S. foreign policy around the world, we're actually the force of tyranny, the force that's defending a collapsing imperial order. And Biden has been totally committed to defending that collapsing imperial order. When he said the U.S. is not at war anywhere in the world, we have U.S. troops everywhere in the world. We're providing weapons of mass destruction that are being used now by Ukraine to target Russia. We're providing the 2,000-pound bombs that the so-called most moral army in the world, the Israel Defense Forces, are using against innocent civilians. When he says we're going to tell the truth, his government has been involved in incredible censorship and an escalation of spying on the average American. So when he says we're going to save our democracy by passing the torch, the reason he left office was not to pass the torch, but he was forced out when the donors started withholding the money. So I think there's a lot that can be said to debunk what he was presenting. But I think the other part of it is that nowhere in his talk was the recognition of the change going on in the world with de-dollarization, with governments moving in the global South to defend their sovereignty. And who are they defending it against? The Anglo-American or the transatlantic empire. So I find this a speechwriter's attempt to spin what otherwise is a disgraceful ending of a very bad presidency.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Kenneth Nicholas O'Keefe, I mean, what is the reaction of American people in general when it comes to the Biden's administration? We've heard a lot of negative feedback, a lot of criticism when it comes to the international affairs. Of course, Dr. Harley Schlanger just actually emphasized quite a few, and you have done yourself a bit earlier. But then, is there anything positive that could be said about the president and his 3.5-year tenure?
Well, I agree with the doctor about the focus of this speech was democracy and the preciousness of democracy. I'll throw everybody for a loop here by pointing out a really painful but absolutely true fact. In terms of democracy, I have been pointing out the fact that these people represent us. In a democracy, we have representatives. In the United States, it's the U.S. Congress with the Senate. Here in England, merry old England, it's the Parliament, where we have lords, and we also have parliamentarians, representatives, all. And they're supposed to represent the will of the people. And when the majority votes for a candidate, then they become a president or prime minister. You know who is actually representing the will of their constituents most in the world right now in terms of Western hegemony? Because even the American people have made clear with regard to Palestine and the open and declared genocide, which is responsible for an ungodly amount of dead, as pointed out by the doctor previously, 2,000 pound bombs being supplied courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer. And right here in England, same policies. Even in America, where the stupidity of my compatriots of America cannot be overestimated, they actually want a ceasefire. In England, absolutely true, once again. But the governments are lockstep opposed to this because they have to make the, quote, hard decisions. You know the government that respects its constituents better than any other democracy in the West? Well, it's the one that openly declares in which 85% of the population supports the policies of the existing government of the Jewish state of Israel. It actually respects the democratic will of its constituents, which is overwhelmingly to exterminate the Palestinians. So the policy we see in Israel is perfectly in line with the constituents of the democracy, well, the Jewish apartheid democracy of the Jewish state of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Harley
It's ironic, isn't it?
Yes, you wanted to say something, Kenneth O'Keefe?
It's just a question. Perhaps the doctor might. It's ironic, I would say, but I don't. If anybody wants to debate me on who's representing the democratic will of the people in these so-called democracies, we never cease hearing from the leaders of our democracies just how special and incredible we are. But the fact is, we never actually represent the will of the people when it becomes an issue of, say, war, for instance, or many other important issues for that matter. Mm-hmm. Israel is actually respecting the will of its genocidal constituency, so the policies are genocidally reflecting the genocidal constituency.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Harley Schlanger, what is the problem here? Why isn't the will of the people not represented? Is it the democratic system in the United States that is flawed, that the citizens, let's say, point of view or voice is not heard?
Well, I think technically the idea of democracy is flawed in the extreme. And the founding fathers actually debated this question of democracy versus a republic. And the idea of a republic is that you have institutions of self-government where the people choose representatives who act in the interests of the people. Now, we are so removed from that right now because of money. There's, you look at the presidential campaign, Harris supposedly raised over $100 million in one day. When you think about the vast sums of money that go into the media to shape the ideas of people, this is why Americans are so ignorant about what's going on in the world. They don't have a clue. I mean, I can tell you here in Germany, people have a clue, but they've given up. The German people have no sovereignty. The idea of sovereignty is lost in the West. The idea of morality is lost in the West. What's prominent is hegemony, control, power. We're the sole superpower, the indispensable nation. And that's repeated and repeated, and so people start believing it, that what the United States represents in the world is good. But if you go outside of the United States, especially if you go to countries in Africa or Asia or South America, you find a different picture. And that's why there's a shift underway outside of the unipolar order toward a multipolar world. And this is something that should be debated in the presidential campaign, but there's not a word about it, except to say Iran and China and Russia are threats to our way of life. And I find that to be completely untrue and grossly incompetent analysis.
But Dr. Harley Schlanger, I mean, what's important for the American citizens and public in general is the internal affairs mainly. And here we see Biden, or President Biden, saying that according to him, he will be focused on doing his job as the president. That means he will continue to lower costs for hardworking families and grow the economy, and says he will keep defending personal freedoms and civil rights. I mean, how is the public going to react with something like this?
Well, the polls show that President Biden has the lowest approval ratings of any recent president. So if he thinks he's actually acting on behalf of the American people, he's missing the message from the American people. That's why he was forced out, because there was no way he could win an election. And so the point is that this illusion or detachment, this arrogant detachment from reality that the establishment in the United States has, is going to catch up with it sooner or later. The question is whether that leads to violence in the streets of the United States, or whether there is the actual emergence of new leadership based on a recognition that we have to fix a system that's broken. And Biden doesn't recognize that. He's not capable of it. I mean, look, the question of what he's going to do the next 6 months, given his state of mind and his confusion and the fragility of his health, he probably should be removed now as president. And his continuation in that office is a threat to the world. He's got his fingers on the nuclear button, and he still thinks that Putin is about to overrun the rest of Europe, and that the Israelis are representing democracy and freedom. So, I don't trust him for the next 6 months at all, but it shows that he's not making the policy. It's being made by an establishment that uses him as a front.
Thank you indeed. And joining us just now is Dr. Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean of International Education and Senior International Officer at California University. Dr. Hamoud Salhi, thank you so much for agreeing to be with us on very short notice. The question goes like this: how did you take the address of Biden, and was it something predictable, let's say, just some kind of a political discourse that would just try to polish the image of a president that has very little time left in the office? It seems that we can't hear you, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. Let's just fix that. And I address the question.
I mute myself.
Perfect. I can hear you like this.
Thank you so much, Karim, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure. I think there are several perspectives to put this to understand the speech. One is there is the legacy of Joe Biden. This is probably his most important speech. And more than anything else, it has to do with important events in global politics, in domestic politics. The second thing that to me is also relevant, and you could see it from some of the excerpts that I've seen, the focus on the youth. And when we look at what happened in the last 24 hours or 72 hours, you could feel that the Biden speech had in mind what's happening, what has happened since his endorsement of Kamala Harris. Specifically, on the issue of youth. In the last, this morning, Harris campaign manager sent a memo explicitly stating that the campaign will be extended to include all the states. Previously, the strategy that the same manager under President Biden was to focus on key states, in particular Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And why this has happened, and why there is a reference to the youth in his speech. A reference to the reason we are expanding they are expanding the campaign, because they want to make this, or they have seen that there is a movement led by not the establishment, not the key donors in American politics, but the youth, raising over $100 million in 72 hours is not something easy. And more than anything else, the majority of those donors were of $5, $10 or small donations, which means that you have a youth out there who is pushing to who is willing to see a new face. And they're willing to say any other one than Biden. Than Trump. Biden, in fact, when asked who can defeat Donald Trump, he said anybody, and then he said probably 50. That's his thing, was off the cuff thing. But the point is that Biden saw that there is a youth movement, hence the reference to the youth. The second thing, this youth is very attached to the Gaza, to the war and the genocide that is imposed, that is led by the Israelis. It is ironic, or is it coincidental, that on the same day that the president is addressing the American nation, Netanyahu gave his speech before Congress. Is this to outdo him? What is the reason? Is it to catch the media? But at least the coverage will be now split between Biden's speech and Netanyahu's speech, so less for Netanyahu exposure. But there is a very, very important at that point. Why, therefore, expanding the youth, the electoral, it's important to rally the youth. And second, the youth is passionate about Gaza. The majority of the youth of the Democrats today are with Gaza. They want Biden to come up with a solution. Those who are on the left side of the center of the Democrat, former campaign dean this morning said it will be very helpful, or I'm paraphrasing, if President Biden or Kamala Harris make a strong statement against Israel and leading and ending the war, because that's what is driving this youth. So that's the other reference to Gaza, to arriving at a solution of the Middle East this war. And connected to that, the last point that I'd like to make is that there is this discussion that the professor or your guest was talking about, that he is not fit, he needs to leave. That's really more of a Fox News, a conservative, ultra conservative ideas that are out there that the Republican side is taking. And the question is, why, if this guy is resigning from running for election, can he actually rule? And the Trump administration, Trump, I should say, and his team, they were discussing possibility of suing Biden for not continuing to run for the election. In other words, they claim that he should continue to rule. But this election, Biden's resignation is not about 4-year ruling, is about the election, having somebody to run the election, to run for the election, to represent the United States for the next 4 years. The 6 month has nothing to do with that. I can imagine in a few weeks or so, if this continues to be an issue, Biden will come up with his medical exams and try to refute this. But it's in the context of that Biden also wants to address the American people from the White House, appearing as presidential and showing that he's fit to run and make decisions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you indeed. So what is exactly happening here? I mean, if we read conspiracy theories, if we follow a lot of critiques regarding what is happening in the US, we see that some people are saying that the United States citizens, I mean, it goes with the American side, they don't care. They live in a bubble, they live in the world. All they care about is their daily expenses, about the taxes and so on. And all the truth about what's happening around them, I mean, internationally, is something that they cannot see daily. And what is the change here? Does it lie in a new generation, in new young leadership maybe, to put the United States back on track?
Well, I'd like to respond to what the professor said about Biden and the youth, because actually it was just brought up by our other guest. The youth were out in the streets defending the citizens of Gaza, the innocent civilians who were the target of Israeli genocidal policies, fully supported by the Biden administration. If you want to stop genocide in Gaza, the United States could have cut off the flow of weapons and the flow of money to Israel. Instead, they voted another $25 billion for this war in Gaza. And it's not even a war, it's a genocide. Now, when students went out in the streets to protest, they were called anti-Semitic because they were opposing a genocide against children. And Biden and the Republicans had the same line. Now, I'm not with Fox News. I'm someone who looks at this situation from the standpoint of history and current international strategic relations. Much of the world has moved to isolate Israel and the United States because of this policy. And so what we're seeing in the defense of the idea that Biden is somehow opening up to youth, he could have listened to the youth who were protesting on the campuses last spring. There are going to be more youth demonstrating. There were Jewish youth in the rotunda of the Capitol yesterday demanding that Netanyahu not be allowed to speak. So I think we're seeing an awakening of the youth, somewhat similar to 1968. But I think Biden is not supporting that, he's not defending that, and the idea that that's somehow what he's trying to do, I think is preposterous.
Back to you, Dr. Hamoud Saleh. Perhaps you would like to comment about that. I mean, is the youth in the United States awakening to a somber reality of their country that is supposedly democratic and spreads democracy around the world, but we see genocides and wars unfolding everywhere in the world with the United States behind it? Your sound seems to be muted again.
I'm sorry again.
Yes.
I think we are on the same page. We are talking about the same thing with a difference of focus. Let me state that what Biden is doing is not doing out of maybe his good heart or whatever, but it's filled with political calculation. What happened the last few days is that they came to the realization that if they were to win the elections, they have to broaden the base. They have to reach out to the minorities. They have to mobilize the African American Association, the NSSEP, the African American Association, prestigious association, condemned what Israel is doing. You have the vast majority of the youth are with Gaza. Gaza changed the dynamics in American politics. What the establishment is doing, to use the terms that our guests are using, is trying to absorb that because they know very well that if you don't rally, mobilize the youth, you are going to win the elections. It's a matter of survival if we were to make it specifically. Now, the question that I have, perhaps that we need to look at, is this a change in the Democratic Party? Because what you have a Democratic Party that has grown very, very sort of detached from the minorities. And I wonder how long the narrative that Harris is bringing will last, particularly after the convention, the Democratic Convention next month. Will this carry her to win the votes and to rally the masses behind her? Because Biden made promises to the minorities, did not deliver, and that include African American, that include Hispanic, and now any other minorities he has not delivered. So what is the difference? Does Harris have tools that Biden doesn't have? What the current Biden administration and those advocates of the Democratic Party, they are trying to paint her as someone who is appealing to the left, center to the left, meaning that she is advocating for social justice, that she is going to attack Trump on record, and she is as an attorney and prosecutor, she will bring him to law, that she will be able to fight against him and win. And she has the winning formula to make this happen. The question again, is this reaching out to the minorities going to be forever? In other words, what's going to happen afterwards? Certainly, the minorities have been disappointed by Obama. They have been certainly disappointed by Joe Biden. What does Kamala Harris has different? The only thing that she has different is that she has a man, Donald Trump, who has is known for his positions. He's going to be leading the country in the direction that would not benefit the minorities, and that's why this youth is gonna. Biden is appealing to it, and the youth will cast its vote not for Harris most likely, but a vote against Trump. So we are in a very, very delicate moment in American history. Is this a change of cards? Certainly of guards. When you hear Biden, there is a sense that, we older people are going to give you this the leadership, and now it's the role of the young leadership. But what does that translate in Congress when you have the people who are the progressives are called names, are treated differently than others? So there is a change in culture that has to come with it. But the speech, in my opinion, is built around what happened in the last 72 hours. Basically, the youth are important. If the Democrats are to win the elections, they have to expand their base, and that expanding their base means that mobilizing the women, mobilizing the African American, and mobilizing the youth in general. And this is really where the whole thing. Do we trust this formula to work? I think we have to give Biden a chance, Harris a chance, just as you give a chance to Trump, for that matter.
Perfect. And Mr. Kenneth Nicholas O'Keefe, so of course maybe some people would agree with you that when it comes to the general policy of the United States, not so many things are going to change, but they say also that the devil lays in the details. So between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, there seems to be a difference for countries like the Arab countries who are maybe, some of them express their anxiousness. If we go to Europe, we see some European countries expressing certain apprehension of Donald Trump coming back to the scene. How do you see it yourself?
Well, I'm still shocked that political commentators don't understand very simple things, such as Kamala Harris, who comes from California and replaced my home state, replaced Barbara Boxer, Jewish, whose husband is Jewish, literally had to be ordered by a court to release prisoners for minor drug violations. We're talking in the United States for like cannabis or something like this. So they weren't like big drug dealers like cocaine cartels and things like this. They were actually being used as slave labor in California, and they were not being allowed out of prison because of the slave labor. And Kamala Harris actually acknowledged in a courtroom that the reason why they didn't want to let the prisoners go was because the state needed it for the slave labor. I've also pointed out the transgender agenda, which the previous guest right there apparently doesn't understand this. He actually believes that maybe there might be a difference and that there's some realistic chance that something is going to change if Kamala Harris gets in. She supports 100% the total destruction of the family by way of this transgender woke agenda that now translates to Gay Pride Month, literally, while we've got homeless people, inflation, joblessness, an absolute open borders with immigrants flooding through, 4 million this year alone. I don't know how any serious commentator could honestly believe that anything is going to be better with someone like, whether it's Biden, who touches kids inappropriately and showers with his daughter, who wrote about it inappropriately, how her father did this, and never mind him declaring that you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist, and he proudly is a Zionist, giving, as the other guest, who I agree with far more, 20 billion extra dollars in the middle of this genocide, now where literally the Lancet, the British medical journal, is saying that the actual dead that we can project that are either dead now or going to be dead as a direct result of the famine, of the injuries and whatnot, is 186,000, which would be 8% of the population of Gaza. So I know that the American people know more than some of the commentators, apparently, because nothing is going to change, whether it is Biden, which it ain't, or it's Kamala Harris, which it could be, or it's Trump.
Clear. The idea is clear, Mr. Kenneth Nicholas O'Keefe. So technically, Mr. Kenneth Nicholas O'Keefe, you don't see any change, somber reality for Americans and for the international scene. But unfortunately, we have reached the end of our special coverage for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Special guests for our panelists as well for their analysis. Thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on our channel. Until next time, have a good one.